Hello, my name is Elise Krumholz, and I am the coordinator of Student Conflict Resolution Services at MSU Denver. I'm here to offer some additional commentary and thoughts around restorative justice and hopefully help further our conversation on this topic. As part of my role at MSU, I coordinate the Dialogues program along with Dr. Katia Campbell, whom you heard from earlier today. I also have been a restorative justice practitioner for the past 10 years and am leading the restorative justice initiatives happening at MSU Denver. So hopefully this commentary will, like I said, help us further this conversation around restorative justice as a pathway to justice and accountability and healing. First, I want to acknowledge the thoughtful debate that occurred, the great questions to each other, and for having a space to engage in this virtual and international conversation on restorative justice. So to start, I want to commend those on the pro side of the restorative justice argument on how they centered the importance of community justice and to challenge some of the systems-based justice, or what we consider as the traditional justice system. Oftentimes we feel really disengaged, or folks who are going through the process of the traditional justice feel disengaged from that process. That includes the responsible party, that includes victims or the harm parties, and really the broader community, how that ripples out. When it comes to thinking about victims, I think you can further your argument about really digging deep into how restorative justice is truly victim-centered. So in other words, victims should be informed about the process. They have the ability to express what they need directly to the responsible party or the offender or the community, and they have a voice in the outcomes of a restorative circle or process, and how they want their needs to be addressed. And beyond that, restorative justice is a voluntary process, and no one should be coerced or forced to participate. So that's in place in part to not create more harm for victims. And so the responsible party needs to be willing to take responsibility and do what is necessary to make things right, or to restore the harm that they caused. There are also ways to include voices of victims without them having to face their offender directly. And so when it's not okay to come together, and that's okay, there might be alternative ways to ensure that a victim's voice is being heard. So to further your argument, again, you can explore how victims are cared for through a restorative justice process and how that varies from that traditional justice process or that retributive justice process. But to bring it back how this argument was well formed, how we see and do conflict is shaped by our communities. And the Western traditional justice systems, like in the US, we have effectively diminished the community role when there is conflict or wrongdoing. And this has had an impact on how we socially expect and experience and uphold accountability. And it doesn't always acknowledge the ripple effect that occurs to the offender themselves, the victim, and to the community. And so traditional or dominant notions of justice systems do not necessarily encourage active accountability. So it's a different way of looking at accountability in restorative justice, and encourage a stake in their own restoration for the offender, that is. So the power of community is often undervalued and underutilized. And so restorative justice really focuses on our interconnectedness as a pathway for that healing. And you can find a lot more information in books like Race and Restorative Justice by Fania E. Davis, that really talks about also the indigenous origins of restorative practices from many different cultures around the world, which I think can also breaks apart different ways of how we do and see conflict culturally. For the con side, it is right to challenge practices that call themselves restorative, but do not tend to the needs of the victims or make restorative justice required, for instance. These are not practices done in fidelity to restorative justice principles and often create more harm. Additionally, restorative justice is not always culturally responsive or consider individual needs, like mentioned by the other expert panelists. And restorative justice, is, and like others did say, restorative justice is a process. It can't be wrapped up in a pretty little bow and one and done, we've got this. That's not typically how this works. And actually restorative justice is an investment, and a lot more preparation needs to be done with all the stakeholders to ensure that the facilitators and the process are truly responsive. And so I think that the con side did hit on some of those areas that we need to really deeply consider in order to make restorative justice a good option. On the con side, I would want to know more about how courts are truly impartial, or how they really are serving victims, and not minimizing their voices or not re-traumatizing them through a court process, for instance. And then I'm very curious about some of the thoughts around vigilantism, and I'd like to know more about how that has occurred and how that can be addressed. So lastly, just in general, an area that can be explored when thinking about restorative justice is the idea of reintegration. So in Colorado, we often talk about the 5 R's of restorative justice. Dr. Beverly Title is the person who put those together initially, and you can find more information at Restorative Justice Colorado. But those 5 R's are respect, responsibility, relationship, repair, and then reintegration. So, when we're thinking about reintegration, it's often not considered as much as some of the other R's necessarily. But in the US, at least, around 95% of those who are sentenced to prison leave prison and come back into the community. And so to re-engage successfully, to uphold community bonds, those are vital in order to help not create more harm. And so restorative justice attempts to embrace this idea of reintegration and the community's role or obligation even to help those re-engage who have caused harm. And that also includes how we think about victims and how we're making sure that we are thinking about re-engagement for victims in terms of care and support and safety, amongst many other things. And so reintegration is an area that I think we could dig deep in and think about restorative justice's role of, well, what do we do after crime or after wrongdoing occurs, after violence has occurred, knowing that people are going to come back to the community, and we want to make sure that we're helping people not cause more harm. So just some thoughts for today. Really well done. I so thoroughly enjoyed hearing from everybody, and I wish you all well. Thank you.